wives were doing something, and we went off to have coffee, and he started explaining his dissertation topic to me on a napkin, a piece of paper. And I just remember kind of shaking my head thinking, if I were to believe what you're telling me, everything would change. And that's where that comment came out that I'll never forget. I said, are you telling me that if I asked Moses whether the other gods really exist, he would say yes? And Mike's classic answer, he said, no, he would be surprised at the question. That the idea that the gods aren't real would have been a shock to Moses. So from there, I changed my dissertation topic to the gods of the Old Testament and how they work into the principalities and powers of Paul. And so he did his dissertation around the same time I did mine. I was pastoring by that point. He was at Logos by that point. So our lives often paralleled at this juncture. And so we talked. He was my closest conversation partner, I would say, throughout most of my life until, again, his passing. So that's my background, and I hope it's enough to get us going. Mike, go ahead and tell us about where you're coming from.
So I guess the pathway that I came to Christ, or just coming to knowing who Jesus was actually, you would think that I could technically say I grew up in a Christian home, but in reality, it was more of Christianity was part of my mother's life, for example, but it wasn't a very integral part. She grew up in a Christian home. She went to church. But eventually, when she and my dad got married, they were originally out in Hong Kong, and then they moved to the States, specifically to Boston. And they gave birth to my sister, so she was the first of us here. And eventually, many years later, I came out. And part of that interesting story is that it's funny enough, when my parents were thinking about having a second child, one of the things that my mom did, because she has some of that church background, was she started praying to God to specifically give her a son. They were hoping to have a son. And so if that were to occur, one of the things that she had promised in that prayer was that she would support, or she would dedicate this son to whatever God would lead him to do. Wow. And ironically enough, her name is Hannah.
I was going to say, that sounds like a Hannah story to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so originally, and I only found this out years later when I was like a teen, that my name was originally supposed to be Samuel. She was thinking that after I was born, that she would call me Samuel, sort of the whole entire Hannah-Samuel connection. Yet it was my oldest sister, Ruth, who, hearing the name Samuel, she immediately just blurted out loud, that doesn't sound good. Samuel Chu, or Sam Chu. And so she recommended Michael or Mike.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and so it was a funny moment that in many ways it was my sister who named me and not my parents. But that was kind of like that little bit of the background, was that there was already something going on that was even well beyond my own control and my own reach. I didn't become a Christian until I was about 15. And I think a lot of that was because I was trying to be too clever. I had heard about Jesus. I had heard about the idea of salvation, but that didn't really click with me because I purposely, and I personally had wanted just to live my life the way I wanted. And so in some sense, the gospel was cool, but I was treating it as, well, that's the last case scenario. When I'm on my deathbed, then I'll finally accept Christ after I lived my life the way I wanted to. God had different plans. He showed me that, one, my life is not in my hands, and two, I have absolutely no control of when or how long I might live. And so that placed me on a journey that eventually I came to know who Jesus was. Now, how I came to actually getting to know Dr. Heiser was actually through a very ironic way. For a long time, especially after I became a Christian at 15, I always had kind of wondered if I was ever going to go into ministry, if I was ever going to go into some sort of theological training. And I always had a little bit of doubt. And part of that doubt was simply because I just wasn't sure. Like, could I actually even do this type of research? Could I actually do this kind of work? And I think partly also from my mother's background, it was, you have to be absolutely sure. You have to have a real intense sense of calling and feeling. And I had some of that, but then I wasn't sure. It was that just me making it up. And so eventually, years later, I'm married. My wife and I are at a Christian conference, and Logos Bible Software is one of the folks at these tables. And they're doing a special sale, 50% off. And I always heard about the software. And when I was reading the materials, it sounded really good. And I would only find out about this later, but my wife said initially when I brought up the idea, can I go and purchase this? She wanted to immediately say no. But she stopped herself because a thought ran through her mind, which was, this might finally push him over into actually going to seminary. And so she let me buy it. You were in
software before this?
I was in software. I originally trained as a computer engineer, and eventually I got into software quality assurance and then into IT, technical training work. And so this was just kind of where I was. And we had always been involved with church leadership. Even the church that I'm currently at we helped plant about 12 years ago. And so that was always just kind of in the background, but I just never thought I would ever be at a place where I would be at a pulpit or in front of folks teaching. And she just had that thought. And so as I was going through that software, inside the program, they had a little window with a trailer. And so when I clicked on it, it was a trailer for this book called Unseen Realm with Dr. Heiser. And that was how I first heard of Mike's material about the Unseen Realm. And it intrigued me enough that I ordered the book. And when I started reading it, it blew my mind. One, it made a lot of the stories that I had wondered about, it started making sense. Mm-hmm. And two, I grew up in a Chinese heritage church as a Christian. And one of the emphases within my church was the importance of the good news, of evangelizing, of sharing the gospel to people. And especially the part where Mike talked about the mountain, where he is asking the disciples, who do people say I am? And then he starts talking about the church, and he starts talking about this rock that the church will be built on. It finally started clicking, because I had always heard it as being a Protestant argument, a Roman Catholic argument. But what Mike went down towards was essentially using geography and using the culture and the history of that place to really just break open this idea that it isn't a denominational thing. Right. It's actually a part of the mission of the church and what is part of what we are meant to be and what we're meant to do. And so that was how I got into Mike's material. And then years later, he came down to Boston for a podcast episode that he was doing, and I got to meet him there. And eventually, a year or more later, he and I connected via online, started chatting. And so I started helping him out with some of his side projects, helping him out with his social media kind of presence. And that was how I got introduced to Dr. Heiser and just got to know him as a mentor and as a friend.
Yep. And I got to know you through, I guess, the Awakening School would be where we officially contacted, doing some teaching for them, but also just through the Facebook page and seeing your name there. And so then we just became friends that way. So when I was thinking about, and I forget how we even came to the idea of doing a podcast, or I came to it, but when I thought of a co-host, your name first came to mind, and I thought, well, there's no way you'd have the time to do it, and that would be a big score if I could do that. So I didn't even try. And then somehow I was given the green light to ask you, and for you to say yes was a big thing. So I really do appreciate it. And the way you described your background, I think we should throw this out here right away. I'm non-confessional. In fact, I'd like to ask you how you take that idea. If I were to say to you, I'm non-creedal, I'm non-confessional, I'm Baptist by background, E-Free by licensure, CMA by just because I was in the CMA church for a while. I've taught for 20-some years undergraduate at non-denominational schools, okay? If I were to say I'm coming at the Divine Counsel worldview as a non-confessional Christian, how does that sound to you?
I think it all depends on what we mean by the term confessional or non-confessional, right? So the way that I had gotten used to using the word confessional was simply, you're actually a follower of Jesus. Versus like confessional being like, I confess, or I recite, or I have an allegiance in some sense to a creed. I would say, it sounds fine to me. As long as we're defining the terms.
It's probably good to get that out before we keep going. But the beauty of the Divine Counsel worldview, from what the people that I've met through Mike and such, we don't, and Mike was famous for saying this, that we trust the text. You trust the text. And it's not that creeds and confessions aren't helpful, but we're not going to read the Bible through a creed, and because of a denominational lens and that sort of thing. And so I would agree. In theory, I believe the Bible can be interpreted. The story of the Bible, especially, can be interpreted without the lens of a creed. The danger of that, of course, is getting off on your own little tangents. And I found this in teaching, that when people don't disagree with you from the audience, you tend to think you're right. And so the challenge of a podcast even is thinking that you're right because no one's talking back at you, right? So the beauty of this, I hope, will be that we can play off each other well, and our similar backgrounds and also our differences in backgrounds will be evident for the audience to hear, So, well, good, thank you. And as we keep going here, just on some introductory ideas, I'm always happy to hear, where the Lord has led you and where He's taking you. You're at Gordon, or you finished at Gordon, your MDiv, and you're in doctoral work.
I did. So I finished my Master's of Divinity this past May, and honestly, it was kind of like a either or, and I decided just to give it a try to go into the Doctor of Ministry program at Gordon as well. Obviously, I loved my school, and so it just was just like I tossed my hat in the ring just to see if it actually would work, and they accepted me. And so I literally walked down the graduation aisle in May, and then 3 weeks later, I was starting my program for Doctor of Ministry.
Cool.
And so, I mean, I had friends and some, even my wife were wondering, like, don't you want to take a break? Like, well, I want to, but at the same time, the program started right in June. So
When do
if I
you
wanted to
finish
get in,
then? What's the projected finish date?
the projected finish is in about 2.5 years, I'll be done with the Doctor of Ministry work. When I would actually present my dissertation and hopefully be given my actual degree would be probably 2 more years from then. So I'm looking at a total of 5 years.
Sounds good. So for the record, I work for a bank. I spend 8 hours a day online with doing technical writing for a bank. Outside of those hours, I'm thinking theology all the time, like I've always done. But you're busy with DMin work then throughout the week, and you're busy at your church. So makes sense. Just again, some background to why we're doing this, and to get us into this question of what is a divine counsel worldview, which I'd like to conclude with for this first podcast. There are many divine counsel worldview adherents who are listening here who are either coming into it new or they've been around it for a long time. So I want to be able to appeal to both sides of that. Those who want to understand the divine counsel worldview better than they already do, and those who simply want to know what it even is. I think there's many people who have sat on the sideline looking at that term or hearing about it but not knowing what to do about it. And so I certainly want to welcome people into the worldview as we talk and try to define the worldview in such a way that it's like a clearinghouse for ideas that have been surrounding the worldview for many years. Because again, there are many decision points along the way. I mean, we'll do this when we get into podcast 2 and on. I'd like to go right into Genesis. Mike never got to Genesis in his podcasts. And so this would be a great place for us to jump in and just verse by verse work our way through the text, thinking in terms of, and there's a lot of ways to study the Bible, right? But this podcast will be how to interpret the Bible through a divine counsel worldview. So we'll be selective in the verses that we study and talk about. We're not going to skip any, of course. We don't want to do that because a worldview always takes into account everything that you come across. But at the same time, where we hover and where we dig in will certainly be those issues that a divine counsel worldview touches on. But as I said, there's a lot of decision points along the way, a lot of paths that you have to make a decision. Am I going to do this or that? Am I going to go this path? Or maybe there's 4 or 5 different ways to look at a text and then talk about, well, if I took that path, where would it take me? Where would it end up? If I took another path, so forth, where would that end up? So that'll be a lot of our discussion. And when I say clearinghouse, I mean, I think there's some people who, because of specific, in fact, I just read a review from Desiring God Ministries about one of Mike's books, or was it Unseen Realm? It might have been. It just came out in 2022. A review from Desiring God, and I just read it yesterday, so I'm not ready to do an expose on a review, but nor is it my intention. But I appreciated the writer's point. At the same time, I thought to myself, he's getting hung up on a phrase, a word, an idea that Mike had that may not be a requirement of the divine counsel worldview. So at the end of the article, he tended to, in my estimation, downplay the strength of the worldview based on some of the shall I call them idiosyncrasies that Mike brought into it, right? And Mike has every right to do that. Mike is Mike, and Mike has every right to have views. So do we. And what I want to be able to do through this podcast is say, you can have a divine counsel worldview and yet differ on certain issues within that list of things that we can differ about. So any thoughts there, Mike, when it comes to how to define a worldview? I'd like to spend the remaining time going through what I've come up with as six items that I would call personally a definition of the divine counsel worldview in 6 points. So we'll get to that in a moment. But any other thoughts you had, Mike?
Well, I think the importance of us doing this podcast, it, like you said about clearinghouse, right? It's one of the things that I had loved about when I studied the Reformation was this interesting period when folks like Martin Luther and John Calvin and Zwingli and many others were actually discovering the text for the first time in a much richer way, right? They finally were being exposed for the first time to a lot of the Greek manuscripts that underlaid their Latin translations. And when they started seeing the really stark differences at certain points, that was when they started exploring and started getting more into the actual text. And so I think that's kind of one of the things that I hope to see is that with a DCW perspective, that this spirit of the Reformation, this idea of always returning back to the text would be a primary value. I think, when we were talking a little bit about creeds and confessionals, like I agree for the most part that the creeds are really great summaries of vast amount of like scripture knowledge. It's a very interesting thing to realize that the folks who crafted these creeds they for the most part were reciting the scriptures they were bringing up by memory.
Right.
That they knew huge swaths of it. And so for them, the creeds were really just shortened versions of what was already in their heads.
Right.
But for us these days, everything is essentially on our smartphone. And it is a very interesting kind of concept to realize that maybe we have to make sure that we go back to the text instead of just depending on, in some sense, the Cliff Note version that is often found in the creed.
Right.
And so that's kind of one of the things that's on my heart about it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I like how N.T. Wright puts it. I'm going to paraphrase him. He's one of my favorite authors today. He is certainly not dependent upon creeds, but he appreciates them. And he often says, Luther, Calvin, a generation later and such, they were answering the right questions, or they answered the questions they were thinking about, in his opinion, in the right way, but they may not have been asking the right questions. And I think, for me, the Divine Council worldview as an idea is going back and asking a different question from the text, or sometimes different questions, plural. And from that different question coming up with a whole set of different answers, right? And so it may be questions that were never thought of even by Luther. And so I'm not by any means picking on our forebears for what they didn't see in the text, because our generations after us, people will be looking at us the same way, and they'll say, why didn't they see this or that? And so we all have to approach the text humbly. At the same time, I think what Mike introduced to the world, really, and we often said this to each other, whether we're driving somewhere or just in emails, we're not saying anything new, are we? We're just taking all these ideas that we're learning and going back to the text and seeing how they work. And I remember when I was doing my dissertation, audible, or what do they call it, the oral defense, where you write your dissertation, it's approved officially, but then you sit in front of your department, basically, of your school. For me, it was at Dallas Seminary, and you are quizzed orally over your dissertation. And a standard question that every disserter is asked is what did you add to the body of knowledge? What did you add to the academic world, right? Because you always have to add something. And I had a prepared answer. I said nothing. I simply took what liberal scholarship was saying and applied it to an evangelical worldview. Well, and I didn't mean by that to get in trouble, because I saw the eyes of the department heads look at me with interest, like, what do you mean nothing? And when I explained what I did, oh, okay, well, that made sense, because evangelicals don't read, in general, liberal scholarship. So what Mike did, again, and this is where we often talked, all he was doing was taking liberal or academic work that was being accepted by peer-reviewed journals, that was well-done stuff, and saying to the evangelical world, guys, we got to read this stuff. This is good stuff. And so that's again what I would say about creeds. I don't want to criticize them openly as much as say we have every right, I think we have the duty as modern Christians to think back into the text itself and say, did they ask the right questions? And then go from there. Well, how about we do this? Let's close up our first podcast here by asking the question, so what is a divine council worldview? I think it's a very helpful way to start, so we have some ground to work with. There are, and let me say it this way, these ideas that I'm going to give, 6 in general, are not particular to a divine council worldview, and it's certainly possible that a person who has a divine council worldview is not familiar with what I'm about to say. But here is my best shot at giving definition to what I think we mean, and here's where, Mike, I want you to, honestly push back if you want, or as you would like, about how to define what a world council or a divine council worldview is. Okay, so I'm going to give you, I'm going to read 6 carefully crafted sentences, each one giving an idea to, I think, what's necessary to a divine council worldview. Number 1, the starting point for all biblical interpretation is an attempt to understand the original writer, his intended audience, and the culture they shared. This means, for example, among many things, that all biblical study must use original languages. Okay, so the first idea, again, this is not particular to the divine council worldview, but it's certainly incumbent upon the worldview that at any point during a discussion we say, well, what did the original Greek or Hebrew say? And in new textual work first. And from that world of whether it's language, culture, audience, writer, whatever, they're going to get first dibs on the meaning of the text. And thus that's how we can say, shall we say, that we're not bringing a creed directly into our conversation. It may eventuate, in a creed, but it's not going to start there. Does that make sense, Mike?
It does, and I think that it's just one of those, it's that little bit of knowledge that folks have to always remember, is that the scriptures were not originally written to us. It wasn't originally written to like an English audience. It was originally written to an audience that spoke a completely different language and also lived in a completely different culture. And so there are unspoken rules and values that we have to sort of decipher and sift out before we just make a conclusion on any text.
in that article that I read, that review of Mike's by a Desiring God gentleman, he did give the sense that it can sound, what word do we want here? It can sound a little proud or almost unfair that God would want us to go back to the original culture, the original language. And so as I've shared that idea, even in my teaching over the years, that the Bible can be read in English, but it must be studied in Greek and Hebrew. Just like I use Karl Marx, I've got to use German, or Machiavelli, I've got to use Italian. If I want to study someone, I have to use the original language that they wrote in. That can come across to an audience as either A, that's unfair because I don't speak Greek and Hebrew, or B, I thought God wrote the Bible for us, right? And how, in other words, it's almost a defeatist feeling that you can give an audience when you say you've got to study the text in its original. Most of us don't read in Greek and Hebrew. So is it fair to say, and again, I'm curious what you think, Mike, we're not trying to say it's unfair. We're trying to say this is how any study works on any level for any literature. You're simply asking, what did the writer mean? It's not unfair. In other words, and I don't think it means, and I've never taken it this way, to be that God is being, selective in who gets to read his Bible. He's just saying the beauty of the human understanding of what it means to learn and to discover is just built into us. And if we want to discover what the Bible means, let's do what that task expects of us. So I hope it doesn't come across as an exclusivistic idea, that Bible study is only for some. It does mean the world of discovery is out there for us, and we are expected by God to use every opportunity we can to get further and further into knowledge of the Bible. So, number two of the six. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think just to address that idea, I think one thing that's kind of key, at least for me, that I was thinking about this since last week, was sometimes we conflate the idea of Bible reading and Bible study as though they are synonymous, like that they are equal to one another. And I think the reality is, and even Mike has said this before, where Bible reading and Bible study are actually two separate kind of mental tasks, right? Where more often than not, we should be reading. We should be soaking ourselves and getting familiar with the text. But when we're actually doing study, it does require some work. Now, I agree, if you can get into the original languages, please do. But even if you don't have that training or the ability to get that training, I mean, I remember as a young Christian teen, I discovered the beauty of a parallel Bible, where in one giant book it would have 2 or in my case 4 translations in English of the scriptures, all right next to each other. And so I would actually, when I was doing a study, I would be actually reading the same passage, and I would go to each of these translations, and I would notice, why is it the NIV says it this way, and yet the American Standard Version says it that way? Like, what's going on here? And those moments indicate there's a difference in the text. And
that was my freshman year at Bible college. I had a four-column Bible, and being raised on the King James Version, I had the King James in the left column, and then I had NIV and whatever. And I remember looking back to the left column every time I was wondering what the text really said, right? So, because I would see these other versions, and it threw me as an 18-year-old that the Bible could have different versions, but you learn over time that all 4 of them are basically interpretations of the original text. So, yeah. Well, let's move on. Number 2. I'm sure we're going to come back to these ideas as we go. But the second salient idea that comes into a divine counsel worldview is this, and here's how I'd say it. The cosmology of the Bible presumes a society of divine beings who were created by one deity. This single, Most High God, as he's sometimes called, is named YHWH. We pronounce it Yahweh. Jehovah actually is a Germanic transliteration from that. So Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever. That's the name that this God claims in the Bible. And he exhibits unquestioned eternal rule over all spirits and humans. There's our monotheism. If we wonder, how does monotheism and the divine counsel worldview work together? Monotheism is a 17th century philosophical term, so it's open to discussion as to how to interpret it. And what, as I understand it, monotheism is a comparable idea. It's saying of all the spirits in the world, there is a world of spirits, and we can think of synonyms like divine beings, deities, sometimes angels, although I'm going to recommend we don't think in that term, because it's fraught with medieval overlays. But spirits, divine beings, deities, gods, these are all synonyms for a world that's above us or beyond us or in a spirit realm, shall we call it. And the point is for a monotheistic view to be real for me and a divine counsel worldview to work, and again, I'm throwing this back to you, Mike, to give your impression. We have one deity who creates everything else. And by that act of creation and sustenance, sustaining his creation, he is the unquestioned authority and ruler over all. Okay? Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
I think we can avoid, in other words, polytheism as an attack. And I often hear in the Divine Council Worldview reviews that I hear is, well, boy, it sounds like polytheism to me. But of course, polytheism is, a set of gods that vie for not only worship, but power and authority and things like that. And we're not saying that at all. We're saying there's one God. He often gets the capital G in our head and in our Bible. The Bible didn't have capital letters, though. So there is no capital G God in the Bible. There's a Most High God, there's a Yahweh, and there's those kind of things. But that's the beauty of this worldview, is that we get to go into the text and notice how it defines Yahweh in ways that we often don't expect. And for my money, I take all the capital letters off everything in the Bible, knowing they don't have capital letters. So, Yahweh, your God, turns out to be a small g in my head, because they only had that version of a deity in their head. In other words, the word God has got to be defined for them. It's too general. And that's why Yahweh, your Elohim, is often the way he's described in the Old Testament. But we need to move on. Any other thoughts, though, in response to that?
I think what you bringing up about how the small g and that Yahweh is associated with that, I'm still processing it. I'm still going back and forth on it. But I do understand that in many ways, for the ancient Israelites, they were encouraged to actually view Yahweh as their personal God, as theirs. And so, oftentimes, because we're following a certain kind of rabbinic tradition, often in our English translations, that the divine name is translated as Lord, it does make our translations a little woody at times. And there is something very personal when you actually can say, the Yahweh is my God.
Yep.
And so there's an ownership that's happening. And so I think it's a great thing to highlight. And that it isn't saying that we believe in polytheism and that, that there are all these rivals that have equal power to God. It isn't. He is the sole creator. Yahweh is the sole one who actually made all things.
Yeah. All right, number 3. This is a third of 6 points that would define a divine council worldview in my estimation. At an early point within the biblical story, Yahweh delegated authoritative power to a number of created deities over the physical world. That would include nations and things like that. Judgment is yet promised upon a number of these beings for their misuse of this authority. Now, a lot is packed into those 2 sentences. A lot of Mike's books and writings and discussions are about that idea that, now, this is very distinctive to a divine council worldview. Not only are the gods real, but Yahweh has given to, allotted, delegated to them real power, real authority over the world. And this probably happened, again, there's debate on this issue as to exactly when, but somewhere in early Genesis, we suspect, the Tower of Babel incident is probably the most likely, that God distributed to these beings, and again, how many, which, is there a certain number, that kind of thing I think we can talk about. But the idea of giving these gods a real power, real authority, and expecting the world to live up to that authority, to not push against it, but to actually understand that they are under this authority. To me, this is part of the worldview. And yet, Psalm 82, again, is the classic passage that got Mike's attention. These gods are, by the time you get to the middle of the Old Testament story, you are hearing that Yahweh is upset with what they have done, with that authority, with that power. And he has promised judgment upon them. That, again, can be a conversation, within the worldview. But that's my third point. Any thoughts there?
No, I agree with it. And I think that's one of the interesting things that, the way that I have often described this to folks is that they were not meant to be worshipped. That was part of the judgment that was pronounced upon them in Psalm 82. What they really were supposed to be were guardians over various different people groups. And the fact that they start abusing that power, misusing what they were given to be responsible for, I think that is ultimately where the rubber is meeting the road, so to speak. One time, I remember Mike was answering this question of, who are the divine beings who actually stayed obedient, who stayed loyal to Yahweh, from guarding or stewarding the nations. And he very acutely kind of pointed out that if you have a divine being who is loyal to Yahweh, why would that divine being then, by definition, being loyal, try to get everyone's attention? That divine being would want to repoint everyone back to the Creator God, to the Most High. And so, it was a beautiful kind of argument that, if they were doing their jobs correctly, ultimately we would be directing our worship back to the Most High God, to Yahweh himself.
and we'll take this conversation, obviously, as we get through Genesis. It's going to force us into this conversation. But then as you move through the Bible, you get to Acts 17. Here's my personal opinion. And Mike and I talked about this. I don't think we were exactly on the same page here, but again, that's why it's a conversation point, is that in Acts 17, you get the sense that Paul, who certainly believed that God divided the world into the powers of the heavens, right? That's Acts 17:22 or so, that Paul was hoping that, at least in his sermon to these pagans, that by having that power over them, that we would seek, quote, we would seek the Lord. That they were guardians, they were meant to be guardians that would bring the world to loyalty to Yahweh. Now, whether God knew, again, we don't want to presume that God doesn't know what was going to happen, but the story that Paul had in his head was to these Athenian philosophers was that the idea of God's being over your world and ours, or the world in general, was not God's design to run the world downhill. It was actually meant, if you want to say it this way, to bring the world to a loyalty to Yahweh. But of course, that project failed. And so, anyway, thank you. So that's a third. Number 4, again, of specific, there's so many things that we're skipping over, but here's again what I think is incumbent upon the worldview. Number 4, Jesus Christ has presently assumed by the decree of Yahweh the place of highest honor over all gods and humans. Now, we're skipping a lot of information, of course, from the Old Testament into the New. But by the time we hit Philippians 2, for example, we have a story that is compressed by Paul into this great, what I call the V story, coming from heaven to earth and ascending back. Therefore, he is now exalted above all gods and lords. So whatever the divine council worldview is, person to person, and again, it can vary, I think we agree on this 4th point, that the story of the Bible is ultimately, by God's design, Yahweh's design, his son Jesus Christ is now Lord over all gods and lords and humans. Any thoughts there to add?
No, absolutely agree.
Again, when I say that, even when I read it, I think, boy, did I skip a lot of the Bible there. But no, it's just, we have to move on to, we'll get to the other pieces coming up, but that's the 4th. Number 5, the locus of the gospel message. Now, this is me, Mike. I don't know, again, how it strikes the average ear of the listener, but for me, personally, and this is where I've spent the last 10 years of my life, I know, well, let me give you a 60-second story here, what's behind number 5. When I was attempting to get licensed by my denomination 10 years ago, what I'm about to read was the sticking point. And the denomination, which I love the people of the denomination, again, we left as friends, but the denomination said to me, if that's going to be your gospel, while we may respect it, we can't have you preaching that from our pulpit. So when I read this, again, it sounds pretty straightforward, but this will divide the Christian world, I've found, into not just two groups, but maybe more. So number 5, the locus of the gospel message throughout Acts and Paul's epistles was loyalty to Jesus / Yahweh above all other gods. Now that / is important, obviously, because we have to define then what's the relationship between Jesus and Yahweh. But I'd like to leave that for further conversation. But the point is that the gospel that Paul was going out, moving from east to west, he was heading to the west. Why? Because he wanted to express the authority of Jesus over the entire world, undoing Genesis 11 in my mind. That is the gospel message. And when I say it that way, you can see why a church licensure board would say, well, what about repentance? What about original sin? What about forgiveness? What about the righteousness of God dispensed or imputed upon the sinful individual? When I got that question, I said, those are sub-questions for me. That's not the gospel. That's other issues that come with it. So, what do you think?
I mean, I think over the years, as I've gone into the DCW materials, and really just kind of, also, this is, again, why getting back to the original languages are important. Once I actually had to study what the word for what we normally see in the New Testament translated as faith or believe, that really shifted a way that I had even presented the gospel a lot of times to people, where I realized it really often was a mental assent. Make sure you believe this. But there wasn't an actual, who am I ultimately being loyal to? Now, that was there once you start asking more questions, but that wasn't the forefront in my mind.
Yeah,
and I think that's kind of what this point that you're bringing up is just really laying that out, that loyalty or allegiance or faithfulness, however way you want to describe it, it's ultimately going to be to Jesus the Christ. And that's the gospel message. It is a herald of a coming king, of a king that already had come and will come back again. And so, to me, that there is no problem with that. But I do know that, especially in certain groups, in certain camps and traditions, that message gets kind of lost in the noise with all the other details that, in some sense, they want to make sure you understand, and they have, good reason to. But there is also, sometimes that muddling can really make it hard to realize that at the core of it all, it's about who are you saying is your king.
Yeah, beautifully said. You made me think of something, but I forget it as soon as you stopped talking, I forgot what I was going to say, but that's fine. That always tells me it's time to move on, right? Oh, I know what it's going to be. I'm preaching Sunday. You're preaching Sunday at your church. In my sermon this Sunday, I'm just being one of several of a teaching team, and we're talking about, what we're talking about is Ecclesiastes, but I'm going to bring it into a divine counsel worldview, wouldn't you know it? And the point that Hebrews 11 is the faith chapter, and Hebrews 7 through 10 is the priest stuff, right? And it's funny to me how we have made the priest stuff kind of this mechanical way to get saved, when really I think the point is Hebrews 11 tells us how to get saved. There's your faith, there's your loyalty. These people, and it lists these Old Testament characters that were not behaviorally very good, but they, at least consistently, but they had faith, and the text is clearly trying to say this is what God needs. Hebrews 7 to 10, while important, while interesting, especially to a Jewish mind, I'm going to recommend that's all noise. That's the noise that the Jewish mind goes through in order to get into sacred space and to worship God, with the right to approach Him and stuff like that. But yeah, so I'm just saying what I already said, but the issue or the locus of the gospel for me, and I think the divine counsel worldview can handle this, I really do, that it's about loyalty. It's about Jesus and God and how to, and the Father, and how to think in terms of loyalty to them. The last point as we close up here, again, so much we're skipping over, but to me it's part of this worldview, is in the next age, believers will assume the status of theos, or how do you say it? Theios in Greek. The I is added to the noun theos, turning it into an adjective. Divinely, we are divineness, I guess, or deityness. We are imparted with a deityness when we die, or as believers when we enter the next age. And then I say a position which will rival, possibly replace, the ruling gods of this present age. Again, so much that we can talk about and even disagree about, but the point is that in the next world, the divine counsel worldview has this interesting idea that, again, it's part of the Orthodox Christian faith. In other words, others who are not necessarily part of a divine counsel worldview believe this, but this is part of the divine counsel worldview, that these gods that we've talked about through the entire storyline of the Bible have a role in the next world, and we're not sure how we'll relate to them. At some point, Paul talks about us ruling over them, 1 Corinthians 6. How that will work, we're not told, but the idea that we become, in some sense, theosness, or divine in some world view, and how that works, again, we're on this side of that question. Mike might know more than we do right now because he's passed over. But the idea of us becoming divine is part of the worldview. So we're always aiming toward that.
And it's kind of interesting that you're bringing this up, because even in the last few days, in the Facebook group that I help manage and all, there have been conversations about this old term that's now being made aware to some folks, this term that the early church used to call theosis.
Yep, divinization, Augustine would
exactly.
call it. Yeah.
And I've actually kind of remarked before in times the Reform or Protestant kind of traditions, we have a term called glorification, which is like a 16th century way of, I think, describing the same idea of ultimately we're getting to a place where we will be made like Jesus the Christ.
Yeah.
That
He's the first.
Our bodies will be transformed. The rulership, in some sense, the control that sin would ever have over us, the dominance that it has at times over our lives, that we are freed from that. And I think it doesn't go as far as at times when the early church fathers would look at things and say, this is our destiny. We're looking towards an idea that we will actually rule with Jesus. We will be co-heirs with Him. And that just blew their minds. And it blows my mind when I started learning about it.
I remember as a kid when the idea of eternity hit me. I was 10 years old, throwing a ball against the wall, and it just struck me that I'm going to live forever. And I remember laying in the grass and staring at the sky as a 10-year-old thinking, scares me to death. Scares me to death. But how it's going to work. I think we all get to say from this side of eternity that we don't understand it, right? No one's going to argue that, like next week's weather, why argue about it? It's going to happen. Same with this. Whatever God does in our next age, we are happy participants in that world, but to argue about it is kind of foolish in my mind. But we can speculate, we can read the text and be amazed at it. So that's all part of the worldview. I close with this, and I threw a list together as I was putting those 6 items on paper. I wrote this out. The following ideas are often discussed within a divine counsel worldview, though not all adherents agree in specifics. Mike and I, again, we just have so much fun. That's what I love about Mike. A good conversation partner theologically is someone who lets you vent, smiles at you and says you're nuts, and then remains your friend, right? And that's what Mike was for me on so many levels. So again, listen to this. We will certainly touch on each of these topics as we come across them giving reasons for why a divine council worldview can handle different interpretations. So, things like the identification of the image of God in man, the predictive element of Genesis 3:15, the falls of spiritual beings in Genesis 3:6 and 11, the original fall of Adam, original sin or guilt, the origin of demons, the role and identification of divine messengers, we call them angels, the identification of the angel of the Lord, the appearance of Yahweh on earth, the meaning of the Garden of Eden, the concept of a council, quote unquote, of the gods in the ancient Near East, definition and role of sons of gods. This is a big one because of the Facebook group that I've been listening to over the years. Calvinism and Reformed theology and how it relates to divine council worldview topics. And Mike was a big free will guy. That was our first argument as college friends. I was a big Reformed guy. He was, no, I must say big. That was my background, Reformed. He was coming from free will. So we argued tooth and nail and had friends, still had friendship over it. Relationship of Yahweh to Jesus and other Trinitarian issues. Sacred space. Cosmic geography, that's part of that. Atonement, penal substitution, exorcism. I mean, the list could go on, but that's just what that took me maybe 10 minutes to think through all the things that divine council people love to talk about, but they don't necessarily agree. And that's why I would love this podcast to be a clearinghouse for not every idea, because I don't know them all, but for people to know, hey, you can have a divine council worldview and not agree on what the image of God in man is. That's fine, because it's not incumbent. There will be, and we've used this metaphor as we've talked, Mike. It's like you're in a forest and you see someone walking beside you through the thickness of the trees, and you don't know where their path is taking them. You know where your path is kind of going, and you're following a path. You see them next to you, but you don't see the path they're on, and you don't know how they got on that path, looking backwards. And you don't know if your two paths will converge. And that's what I find in the divine council worldview friendships that I've had, is you hear other views and you wonder, okay, I think I know how you got there. I don't know where it's going. Oh, okay, maybe I do know where it's going. So that's what I want to do during this podcast is give ear, give room, give credence, in fact, to a lot of views that may be part of the divine council worldview per individual, but they're alone on something, so. Where to from here? Let's do this next time we meet is our episode number 2. Let's just drop into the text of Genesis 1 and begin a long weekly. This is our intent, is to have a weekly podcast here to work our way through Genesis. And sometimes we'll slow down, work verse by verse. Other times, of course, we'll just move through it text by text, but that'll be the goal. So, anything else before we sign off, Mike?
No.
Well, welcome to the Divine Council Worldview Podcast, episode number 3. I'm Ron Johnson, and again, glad to welcome Mike Chu alongside. Today's going to be a little different in that we are going to be adding in Rich and Mel. They're going to be a part of this podcast as we go forward. Of course, what Mike and I are doing is very biblical, textual, even exegetical. We're trying to talk about the divine council worldview concepts as they appear in Scripture, and they work their way through the story of the Bible. And we left off episode 2, finishing Genesis 1, and we'll pick up Genesis 2 next time. But what we'd like to do with this episode is, again, welcome Mel and Rich. They're going to have a different emphasis when we have them on the podcast, and we're really here this time just to hear that story and how it will compare to what Mike and I do. So, Rich, welcome, and
hello,
Mel as well, and go ahead and let's jump in. How will your part of the podcast work, and what will you be bringing to us?
All right, well, first I'm going to pray, because I get exceptionally nervous doing things like this. Wandering around the streets and talking to random people for 2 hours is the easiest thing in the world. Coming on here is absolutely not for me, so I'm going to go ahead and pray for a moment. Heavenly Father, we praise you and thank you for your love, your compassion, your mercy, your grace, your holiness, your goodness, the patience that you have for us, and all that you've done for us. We are exceptionally grateful for every day that you give us. Every day, whether it be filled with sorrow and grief or glory and joy, is another day that we get to be here and understand you in this very unique and rare life that you've given us. And we praise you for that. We're all very grateful to be here at this time, that you have created us in such a time as this for the work that you have prepared beforehand that we might walk in and do. And so we thank you. We thank you for the glorious work that you're doing all around the world, that you're bringing people to salvation all over the world. And if anyone thinks that you're losing, they are crazy, because you are winning everywhere, all over the world, and destroying the works of the gods and principalities and powers by bringing people into your presence, by making disciples of people of your Son. And so we praise you for that, God. And I just want to thank you for that which you have given us. I want to thank, the Heisers, Trina, and all of the family for all that they've done and persevered through over the past few years. We thank you for all that you provided for them since Mike's passing and during Mike's illness. We thank you for the heart that they've had to continue the work, even though it is very difficult to lose, that presence in their life. And so we thank you and ask that you continue to bless them, continue to build them up, and provide for them what it is that they need to be able to move forward, and all the support that all of us can give them over, easily the first 2 years to be able to help them, acclimate to this, we want to be able to do. But we praise you for all that you've done for them, God, and we thank you. I want to pray for Mike and Ron, God. I want to pray and ask that you would bless them to see the text as you desire to do, though. Open up the scriptures to them, that they might pull out and draw these beautiful motifs and ideas and things that we all have enjoyed so much in the past decade plus, hearing about the Divine Council worldview. And so I pray and ask that you would continue to just bless them in that. Open their eyes and their hearts. Bless them with the relationships that you want to provide for them over the next months, that they might be able to encourage, exhort, and mentor anybody that they might be able to. And we praise you for that. I pray for me and Mel that you would bless us to be able to find the people around the world who desire more about you, to know more about you, to know more about your scriptures, to know more about the context and content that lives within the pages of our book, and helping us understand you. Help us to find those people and build those relationships so that we can get this work out there to people all around the world. And we thank you so much for that. Lord, and lastly, although it's not something I would normally do, I figured if there was ever a time that Mike was standing next to you and looking down, it would be when all of his bros are here together and trying to do these works to honor both you, God, and to honor the work that he is and that what Mike has done. And so I guess I would just tell him, 3 things. First, I would just ask you to tell him thank you. Thank you for, first of all, giving us Mike, the servant that he was, the man that he was. We praise you for him. He was a great gift to all of us. And in his relationship and his friendship and fellowship, just as a brother and as a friend, has been incredible. But all the dedication and work that he took to you, to wanting to know the truth, to wanting to know the depth of your realities as much as we can know it here on earth. We thank you that he took that path, because many hundreds of thousands of us, if not millions, are incredibly blessed by the work and things that he did. So we thank you for that. Please tell him thank you. Please tell him we all love him and miss him. We all do genuinely love and miss him. In our lives, his presence not only as a teacher, but for many of us as a father, a husband, best friend, brothers, all of those roles that he inhabited throughout the years. For the many of us that didn't have proper fathers and things like that, how he tried to mentor us and encourage us, through those times. We miss that, and we love him, Father. And I guess finally, the last thing that I would say is, please tell him that we'll take the work from here. We'll take it, and we will continue the work of reclaiming the nations, making disciples in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and that we got it from here. So we praise you and ask for your blessing over our time today. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.
All right.
Amen.
All right.
Yeah, we'll take it from here, Rich and
All right.
Mel. Explain to us how your part in the podcast will look and feel, and how it'll be different, but really much the same in keeping both the legacy of Mike moving forward and the desire to understand a Divine Council worldview worldwide. So,
all right. One of the things that we really want to do with this podcast is build relationships with people who not only around the world, which we do want to do, people in different countries and contexts that live in supernatural contexts more than our Western worldview. We all live in a supernatural context, but to find people out there that we can, help get the work that is the translations and Mike's work out to people who can use it. So we're hoping that this will be an avenue to do so. So we're going to interview people who. Basically, I guess I'll start. We're going to ask 4 questions. We're going to talk to people. We're going to ask who they are and where they're from, what they do. We're going to ask them, how did you find Mike's work? Because there are many of us who have these stories about how God, moved all kinds of things in order for us to find this work. And then the impact that work had, as I'll explain in our first podcast, when we recorded. When I heard it, I got really angry, really mad that I could be appointed as a missionary, help plant churches, make disciples, listen to thousands upon thousands of sermons, and have never heard anything like what Mike was talking about. It was frustrating because,
when was that, by the way, Rich? When did you first contact Mike's stuff?
In 2011. And then I emailed him about September of 2011, and then the next time I would email him, it would be September of 2013, and we'd be going out to dinner. So about 2 years to be able to really take it. Because, a lot of times we find that it takes people about a year after finding Mike's work for it to really make its way through, their theology and, be able to work it. So we're going to look for that. And then we want to know how it impacted your ministry. What did it do for you? As a leader, as a pastor, or whoever you are, like, how did it impact what you were doing? and we know that that's difficult. Like people enjoy those stories, like the pastor out in Colorado right now who found Mike's work and is going through it and working through it. People really enjoy hearing those, because many of us have had the same experiences. You know what I mean? We find Mike's work and we go try to share it with people, and people are like, no, they either can't hear it or they're wary. But then there are many people that do, over time, and it turns out excellent. It opens the eyes. What Mike's work is we called it the glue that put it all together. We've been given so many fragmented pieces of Scripture, but he was able to help put it all together. And that really makes a difference in all of our lives. It opens up a different kind of story. His work has helped bring out a lot more identity and purpose within Scripture for all of us, as divine imagers, and also in our, battle against the divine, powers and the rulers and principalities. It brings more of that out. And we think that those stories will be very interesting to be able to hear, for people to hear, because Mike's work has impacted the world. About the unseen realm. I remember talking to publishers and things like that, and they said if you sold 6,000 copies of an academic book, you did exceptionally well. That was a great deal and cause for celebration. Well, the unseen realm has sold 300,000 copies. And so, it's making an impact everywhere. And those are actual numbers, to be honest. And so we're hoping to do that. And so what about you, Mel? What do you think?
Yeah, and tell us the story of how you came upon Mike as well. I'd like to hear that again.
I guess I came upon Mike like probably most people that are following this topic and following Mike's stuff. I was well entrenched in Christian Middle Earth. I had this feeling that there was something more out there. There was greater, deeper context to things. I felt like the Scripture, the stories were doing more, and some of the traditional, church narratives just weren't doing it, weren't cutting it. And this is around the time that podcasts started to become a thing, and Rich will talk about this too, because he had some people. But I think I was listening to. I can't remember who came first. It was either like Canary Cry, or it was Future Quake. What was it, Dr. Future? I can't remember the other guy's name.
Dr. Future and Tom Bionic.
Yeah, Tom Bionic. And I heard them interview Mike. I heard him in fairly quick succession, and just everything in the background just started clicking. Everything. I was like, okay, this makes sense. And it wasn't a bunch of the crazy Christian Middle Earth stuff that was already out there. It made sense. So, I think I got one of his books. Oddly, I think I maybe got one of his novels first and read it. And then the Miklot theme that he had going through that, I was like, that is a great idea. And I just reached out to him and I said, hey man, that Miklot idea you had, yeah, you should do that. And he hadn't done it yet, but he kind of, I think he wanted to vet that I was a real person somehow, and or not crazy maybe. And he reached out and started talking to me. So, told me that he was thinking about getting in the works. So, but I guess the angle that Rich was talking about, and even to the point that you said in your prayer, the thing that Rich and I kind of want to focus on, is that post-Pentecost mission of reclaiming the nations, because that is our, it's not all, God's going to do the work. But just like we're hearing in all of these topics, he likes to partner with us. And so it is like, what is our part? What are the things that we can do to help reclaim the nations? And so you guys, Ron and Mike, you guys are doing the academic part. We love that. I soak that stuff up. I eat it up, But then Rich and our focus is on, well, how do I operationalize this? How do I take this and, speak to other people? And so
it's easy to forget that as Rich prayed, I'd never thought of it that way. The beauty of what you said, Rich, when, if people think that you aren't winning God, that's not true. And it's easy for us Bible guys to, be stuck in the text, even sympathizing with the Apostle Paul, who I wonder if he thought he was going to be successful. I really do. That he was burdened that his ministry was not going to take, because he was giving an idea to the Jew and Gentile that they had never worked together before for anything. There had been no religion that had ever been intertribal in the world. And so Paul was attempting to do something through a risen Christ that had never been done. And when you said that, Jesus, you're winning, or however you said that, I thought, I got to remember that. And so I'll be really happy to hear these interviews you have with people that tell those stories, because for whatever reason, we're all deaf to a lot of them, right? I mean, I'm living in Minnesota, where we're heading into the winter where we don't go outside for months at a time, basically, and it's easy to sit in your own echo chamber and not hear worldwide stories of what God is doing. So I look forward to that.
I agree, Ron. I think that's one of the interesting things about Western Christianity these days. We are so used to hearing essentially the story or the narrative of where everything's going to pop.
Yeah,
like
the declining church.
The church itself in America is dying, or that the numbers are declining. And the data is there, sure, that might be happening, but at the same time, like I know just from the other data about the worldwide church, about the global church, the church that's actually not used to a scientific or enlightened worldview, but is used to actually seeing a world of spirits, a world of an unseen realm. To them, when we share about the DCW, about the Divine Council, about Psalm 82, their reaction is, well, yes, we've known that for a long time. What's new? And their reaction is they're more perplexed by us coming from a Western standpoint where everything has to be re-supernaturalized, versus for them, they're soaked in it. They're living in that, and it's
just at the
useful
ETS
for them.
conference. Yeah, Mike, and you and I, and were you in the session where the gentleman from Guatemala spoke up?
I didn't make it to that
And
one.
he was the speaker was talking about Mike's work, talking about Elohim and the concept of principalities and powers. And a gentleman from Guatemala in the audience, one of the academic guys, he said, "Yeah, you Western people don't understand," and he said it very gently, very lovingly, but he basically said, "In Guatemala, you see it all the time. This is a common worldview outside of these walls," and it was just good to realize that. So
Yeah, and imagine, you know what I mean, instead of going down there and telling them that everything they believe is fake and does not exist, but you're able to acknowledge that spiritual reality and then confront it. Because, I mean, your deities and gods and spirits, they are very real. They just, suck. And Jesus is king and glorious and the one that you should turn to. Your allegiance needs to turn from them to him. Like just talking about the church in the world, I got this from Mike's bunch of books. This is, I believe it's What Does God Want in the Azeri language for Azerbaijan, and you guys understand what's happening with the Armenians and stuff all there in Azerbaijan, man, I hope that somebody's got those books out there. I have no idea where it came from, but I know that somebody there in country has printed these books and are doing something with it, or, the Swahili version of Supernatural, these are out there, or the Arabic copy of What Does God Want. People have printed these out, taken them to their home countries, because, the whole point was like your home language, your heart language. We wanted to produce stuff in that. For them, because really the first thing I said to Mike when I sat down with him, thinking I was only going to spend one night with him, was like that your work is made for people around the world. That's all I could think of when I found his work, and read it, that it was for this, since I'm very, I guess you'd say, missions minded. That's what I headed for and things like that. Hearing that it was made for people around the world. So we really want to explore and see what the fruit of it has been, because we've been able to get it out into a great deal many places, work with missions organizations and people and pastors that are actually all over the world, and we're able to give it to them, but we have no idea what the fruit is. We know that it's there. We know that God is working and using these things, but we want to try to explore and see what some of these things are, so that we can all be encouraged again about hearing what Christ is doing, transforming his people all over the world and saving people, and using a work like this. Like I've heard many times about What Does God Want. People just love that little story part. You know what I mean? It solidifies things so incredibly for them. So yes.
Yeah, I agree. I like the, I noticed I've traveled a lot internationally, and, Japan has been a place that my wife and I have really enjoyed going. And I started going a little bit after I was reading Mike's books, and we would go to these shrines and temples, because even when I go to Western Europe, I love going to the cathedrals. And so when I go to Japan, I like going to the shrines and temples just to see what they're like. And there's this one I went to in Kyoto called Sanjusen Gendo. I may be butchering that. But it's a temple of 1,000 Buddhas. And I walk into it, and there's all these little 3-foot tall Buddhas, and they're slightly different. The faces are just a little bit different. And then in front of them are these demigods, and they have these descriptions of what the demigods were about. And I remember stopping and reading all of those plates and just thinking, there's more to this. The people here, they've believed in these, and they have prayed to these, and there's a history here. And so I think these are conversations that Rich and I have had, that we want to be able to talk to people in other countries, and talk to people here that are thinking about going to other countries, and not just telling them, no, your gods are fake, they're not real. It's like, no, there probably is very much a reality to those. But here, let me give you the real God. Let me give you the number one Yahweh. And kind of to your point, Ron, earlier, is like when Paul was thinking about, will I be successful? Will this work? Will these Greeks and these Romans, will they accept what I'm saying? I think there's this aspect that it's just kind of like you just have to deliver it, and then it's on God to like work out that truth in that person's heart and mind. Because I know for me, when I started hearing the stuff that Mike was talking about, it was like, it just, in my spirit, it just clicked. I knew this is kind of like one of you guys are saying, this is the glue that made all these different separate data points bind together. It's what contextualized everything. And so I think if we can meet and talk to other people that have been doing this in their country and been addressing these other gods, been addressing the ideas and the concepts that their cultures have been working with, but then also kind of bring in, hey, here's the number one big guy, and here's the background behind all of this. I think that truth will kind of speak to them. And whether the numbers that they're talking about, the church is in decline, sure. If you want to count the actual building of a church or the numbers in a church, that may be in decline. But the spiritual hunger that people are seeking is not in decline. If anything, it's on the uptick. And I think people may be withdrawing maybe from big organized church, but they're still looking for it, and I think they're still finding it, and I think they're finding it globally.
It's interesting you brought that up, because about a month ago I was at a conference where we're talking about biblical literacy. Like how well read are people even reading the Bible? Are they even looking into the stories? And one of the things that was brought up is the attendance to churches, or the actual reading of scriptures. Yes, it has been going down. Even after this COVID bump, it's been going down. But what the stats are also showing is the hunger and interest in spirituality, it's still rising. And a friend of mine that was at ETS, we were chatting and talking, and I brought up a quote that I remember from my intro to New Testament, just the very first class. And he introduced us to the idea that ironically here in the West, we are a victim of our own success. Because essentially, the church won. We actually had defeated the gods, especially of Europe, of essentially all the religious systems, all of the pagan systems that were existing. The church actually won. But then the irony is, after that victory, we slowly, as we're reading the scriptures, we're looking at words like Elohim. We're looking at words like gods. And then we're getting so confused because essentially we don't have apparently enemies anymore. And so we start trying to justify or make up other definitions for it. But then when you take the same scriptures and you present it to someone from Southeast Asia and they see the word gods, to them it's like, yes, I deal with this all the time. I grew up in this. I was soaked in this. Why are you guys thinking this is talking about men or judges or special kind of human beings? Like, this says gods. I am living in the midst of that kind of culture right now. And so it's just interesting. Like, we have become a victim of our own success, in that we were so successful in purging out the gods from our cultures that there is cities that now coming back in.
That was one of the sessions that I sat in. Again, Mike, I think you stepped out on that one. But the story of the point of the paper at this conference, or this session, was that Elohim, he was just redoing Mike's work, basically. And he even just said, this is the work of Michael Heiser, who we have just lost. But then he took 20 minutes to tell the audience what we all should have known. But that's where this gentleman from Guatemala spoke up and said, basically, I can sense that here in the room, you're having trouble with the idea that gods are real. That's because you live, as you said, Mike, we've had so much success in proclaiming the word that the Bible itself has become not understandable. There's just this disconnect that's happening in the Western world. And he told the story in Guatemala of going to Catholic churches outside the main, large cities. And he says it's very common to have shamans who will be sitting on the steps of these Catholic churches talking about other spirits and things. And the priest of the church knows that he can't dismiss this guy because all the people of the village believe in these other gods. So even as this priest is wanting to say that Jesus is better, he, as he says, as he was telling the stories, most of the priests won't go there because they'll lose their people, he said. So the battle of which God is stronger is happening every week in these villages in Guatemala. And the priest who is on the right side, he believes in Jesus, he doesn't want to challenge, he said, these other shamans because the people wouldn't believe him. again, it just gave me the sense of, boy, am I living in a world that just does not think like this, right? Where everyone goes to church and you sit and you listen to the sermon, you go home. That's not what's happening around the world.
You know, and I feel sorry for that priest, because he was, that priest, you know, he's essentially, he's being given an opportunity for some kind of like showdown at the OK Corral. You know, it's like Wyatt Earp at the OK Corral, and he has the ability. He's a little more concerned about the people, about what the people think, and like that all of this is on him, that all of this power or this belief set is dependent upon him, as opposed to just showing up and just saying, God, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't stand for this guy to be out here. I can't stand for this guy to be on the steps. You're greater than this. You're greater than this shaman and all of his gods. I just want to show up, and God, I need you to do the rest.
Well, this gentleman, when I asked him, then I raised my hand and I said, can I ask you, sir, when you talk like this, how, number one, why didn't the priest challenge him? And number two, in America, how have the gods concealed themselves, in your opinion? Because I've often been asked that. How, if these gods are so real to the rest of the world, how come in America we don't see them the way that the third world does? And he quickly shot back with both questions an answer of, number one, I don't think that priest knew who Yahweh was. That's my suspicion. He said he knew it, but I didn't sense after talking to him that he really knew. And then he said, in answer to your second question, I think that America has a lot of false Yahwehs, that we say it. But the powers of darkness, rebellious Elohim, are winning the war in Western in America or the Western world, because the Yahweh that we preach so often is not the Yahweh of the Bible. And he called it false Yahwehs, and he was willing to leave it there. So again, it sounded like, without him having ever read a word of Michael Heiser, he was living in that world, and he knew what it was like. And the rest of the people in the room, I'd say about 30 of us there, I got the sense again that we just didn't, unless we were aware of a divine council worldview, we just didn't know how to tap into this.
Ron, what you mentioned, it reminds me a little bit of this is partly why I came to love the melding of church history and theology and exegetical biblical studies, because you get a fuller picture of like, how in the heck did we end up where we are?
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned in church history was just that even with us Protestants, right, we were so excited at the beginning, the first generation, of like, yes, the word of God and grace alone, and we got to proclaim it to the nations. But then we got mired in not just spiritual or biblical wars on like, what is communion, Eucharist, what is baptism. Not only did we get mired in those kind of questions, but we literally got mired in real wars, right, with other Roman Catholics, with even other Protestants, to the point that when we were done with it all, pretty much all of the Protestant factions and even Roman Catholic factions, they all agreed, basically, let's stop fighting, but also let's just kind of lick our wounds and just focus nationally in our own little countries. So you in Sweden, you focus on Sweden. You in France, you focus on France. Everyone just focused on themselves. And the question of going out to the nations, proclaiming the gospel of the one true God, that became less important. And even some Protestants, scholars, came up with rationales of, well, the gospel went out to South America. The gospel already went out to Africa, and those people rejected it, technically from the Roman Catholic missionaries.
Right.
So because of that, they had their chance. It's too late. And we just need to focus on ourselves right now. And so in a weird sense, I see the repercussion is that we were given the Great Commission to go out to the nations. The West may have been really great in, yes, we defeated the gods here in our regions, but the mission is not done. And over time, I think that kind of malaise has slowly crept in, where our theology was no longer included.
And this will be something that, as you and I, Mike, will be going forward and looking through the text for Divine Council themes. I'm reminded of a review that someone did on Mike's book. I just took a picture of it on my phone here, so I'm going to jump in where he says, and he's complaining about Mike's view. More broadly and emphasizing, he says, the reality of other spiritual beings, especially malevolent powers, Heiser tends to downplay the central problem described in Scripture, that is our sinful state before a holy God. And that's, I think, this is my personal opinion, that the Western Church has come to emphasize behavior management so much, right? Even the concept of a penal substitution is really a behavior management model where God is looking for perfection. He doesn't find it in you, so he takes Jesus' perfection and gives it to you. And it's all about sin management, right? And as this reviewer says, if you emphasize other gods too much, you're going to downplay sin. Part of me says, I know, that's the point, that once we handle the biblical story of which God to worship, we'll get to the issue of sin. That will be taken care of. But this is my personal opinion, that the Western Church has switched these two stories out, saying, well, we're not going to worry about malevolent powers. What we're going to do instead is go after sin and making sure people ask forgiveness for it, for instance, that sort of thing. So I'm getting a feel, but that's why I'm so excited to have Mel and Rich be part of this, because I think they're going to tap into, during their podcasts, a part of the Divine Council worldview that is on the ground, that people see every day, and we often just don't get to it. So.
When I, one of the quotes about like the gods, because I'm not sure we expelled the gods at all. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and the hallmarks of the gods are dehumanization. When you see, sex trafficking and drug use and all these other things, which, I saw, so much in San Francisco in that area. It reminds me of that quote from I can't remember the movie. I think it was called The Usual Suspects, but the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was making people think he didn't exist. I say, no, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was making people think he was the only one that exists. Because everyone will acknowledge a devil, but get no further in anything else. We were talking about that priest down in Guatemala. About 16 years ago, I was in Haiti, and we were in a place that it was like a couple hour flight or whatever it was in some cargo plane to get to this place. But they had no running water and they had no electricity. Filled with voodoo and all things like that. So one of the nights there was, you can hear the voodoo drums, and they were having something. They're like, look, don't go outside, you might get kidnapped. And I was like, let's go there and cause trouble. I said, look, I'm a big dude and I'm willing to go. I said, the guy next to me here is a former street fighter. I said, the guy next to him was actually a Green Beret. I said, the guy next to him, I said, look, we can go out there. And these guys said to me, these people from there, they said, you Americans don't understand the spiritual nature of things. And I was like, yeah, some of us do, let us go out there. But that's really, how they view the American Christians as very weak in that way. And they never let us go out there and, actually cause any trouble, which is too bad, because you can see that it was needed for that confrontation, because people there were still wrestling, with voodoo. They still had their little voodoo things, and hadn't given it over to Christ because of the power that it had. And you could tell that these power confrontation might need to happen. Someone might need to die in order for people to see the true glory of God, and in those contexts.
I think the Western Church, we have forgotten that part of the whole entire calling is that we lay down our lives. And I think there's that fear that comes in, that kicks in, of we don't necessarily want to risk our lives. And Rich, I'm glad you brought that up, because it reminded me of a few years ago within just the Facebook community that we have for the DCW. There was a gentleman, in some sense, we forget that the gods, or the Elohim, or however you want to call them, the other divine beings, they're very insidious in that they are very good at trying to appeal to what we would want, right? Why would we give an allegiance besides the one true God? Is because you have other rivals who are trying to say, I can do better. I can give you something that you truly want. And this person, he claimed that he was a Christian missionary. And yet he actually said, I think the practice of voodoo, I think the use of those practices, it's very good. It's actually good for social justice. It's very good for bringing justice to Haiti. And that we need to partner with voodoo practitioners to be able to do this for the greater good of the people of Haiti. And I was appalled. I was just the fact that, yes, I'm a Christian missionary and I care a lot about the people of Haiti, but here's this promise that I think if we practice these kind of spiritual practices, we can bring peace and real shalom to the people of Haiti. And there was a little bit of wow, the seduction. The seduction is there. And that's a little bit of how it can get into us, because of, I can offer you something better.
Well, I think also the appeal, the fact that a lot of these Christians, particularly Americans, we think of whatever, let's say demons, or in this case, other gods, we think of them as always bringing negative characteristics, not being able to provide anything good. And so I think it's kind of time that we need to kind of own up to the fact that, hey, these people in these other worlds, they see some kind of benefit from this. They are getting some kind of temporal benefit. They're getting some kind of thing. There's a deal that's kind of going on, and there's something that entices them to coming back.
I asked them, how do you know that your gods and spirits that you worship love you? Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, I ask people when I talk to them about their deities and things they worship, I was like, how do you know that they love you? Can you show me that? Because I can tell you for hours how I know Jesus loves me. And they don't answer, obviously, because they think it's crazy that I even ask that.
Yeah. in Jeremiah 44, this is 15, then all the men who knew that their wives had burnt incense to other gods, with all the women who stood by, a great multitude, and he's complaining about it. Then they said this, we will certainly do whatever has gone out of our mouth to burn incense to the queen of heaven, probably Asherah, and pour out drink offerings to her, because, verse 17, for then we had plenty of food, were well off, and saw no trouble. And I've often taken that to mean, if I think that other gods don't give other people happiness, even shalom, if you want to call it that, and a meaningful life, then I'm missing the point. I think that's exactly what they do, that they're very good at counterfeiting the kind of happiness that I have found in Jesus. I mean, I was taught growing up that the way to give the gospel is say, I know you're not happy, and I can give you something that'll give you happiness. And the problem that I often had was the person would look at me and say, what do you mean I'm not happy? I'm doing fine.
Might need to die in order for people to see the true glory of God. And you know what I mean? In those contexts, Devil Ever Pulled was making people think he was the only one that exists.
This is my personal opinion. The Western Church has switched these two stories out. Central problem described in Scripture, that is our sinful.
Pretty much all of the Protestant factions and even Roman Catholic factions, they all agreed, basically, let's stop fighting, but also let's just kind of lick our wounds and just focus nationally in our own little countries. So you in Sweden, you focus on Sweden, you in France. And even some Protestants, scholars, came up with rationales of, well, the gospel, technically, and we just need to focus on ourselves right now. And so in a weird sense, I see the repercussion is that we were given the Great Commission to go out to the nations. The West may have been really great, and yes, we defeated the gods here in our regions, but the mission is not done. And over time, I think that kind of malaise has slowly crept in, where our theology was no longer included.
And this will be something that, as you and I, Mike, will be going forward and looking through the text for Divine Counsel themes. I'm reminded of a review that someone did on Mike's book. I just took a picture of it on my phone here, so I'm going to jump in where he says, and he's complaining about Mike's view. More broadly and emphasizing, he says, the reality of other spiritual beings, especially malevolent powers, Heiser tends to downplay the central problem described in Scripture, that is our sinful state before a holy God. And that's, I think, this is my personal opinion, that the Western Church has come to emphasize behavior management so much. Right? Even the concept of a penal substitution is really a behavior management model where God is looking for perfection. He doesn't find it in you, so he takes Jesus' perfection and gives it to you. And it's all about sin management, right? And as this reviewer says, if you emphasize other gods too much, you're going to downplay sin. Part of me says, I know, that's the point, that once we handle the biblical story of which God to worship, we'll get to the issue of sin. That will be taken care of. But this is my personal opinion, the Western Church has switched these two stories out, saying, well, we're not going to worry about malevolent powers. What we're going to do instead is go after sin and making sure people ask forgiveness for it, for instance, that sort of thing. So I'm getting a feel, but that's why I'm so excited to have Mel and Rich be part of this, because I think they're going to tap into, during their podcasts, a part of the Divine Counsel worldview that is on the ground, that people see every day, and we often just don't get to it. So.
When I, one of the quotes about like the gods, because I'm not sure we expelled the gods at all. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and the hallmarks of the gods are dehumanization. When you see, sex trafficking and drug use and all these other things, which, I saw, so much in San Francisco in that area. It reminds me of that quote from I can't remember the movie. I think it was called The Usual Suspects, but the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was making people think he didn't exist. I say, no, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was making people think he was the only one that exists. Because everyone will acknowledge a devil, but get no further in anything else. We were talking about that priest down in Guatemala. About 16 years ago, I was in Haiti, and we were in a place that it was like a couple hour flight or whatever it was in some cargo plane to get to this place. But they had no running water and they had no electricity. Filled with voodoo and all things like that. So one of the nights there was, you can hear the voodoo drums and they were having something. They're like, look, don't go outside. You might get kidnapped. And I was like, let's go there and cause trouble. I said, look, I'm a big dude and I'm willing to go. I said, the guy next to me here is a former street fighter. I said, the guy next to him was actually a Green Beret. I said, the guy next to him, I said, look, we can go out there. And these guys said to me, these people from there, they said, you Americans don't understand the spiritual nature of things. And I was like, yeah, some of us do, let us go out there. But that's really, how they view the American Christians is very weak in that way. And they never let us go out there and, actually cause any trouble, which is too bad because you can see that it was needed for that confrontation because people there were still wrestling you know what I mean, with voodoo. They still had their like little voodoo things, you know what I mean, and hadn't given it over to Christ because of the power that it had. And you could tell that these power confrontation might need to happen. Someone might need to die in order for people to see the true glory of God, and you know what I mean, in those contexts.
I think the Western church, we have forgotten that part of the whole entire calling is that we lay down our lives. And I think there's that fear that comes in, that kicks in of like, we don't necessarily want to risk our lives. And Rich, I'm glad you brought that up because it reminded me of a few years ago within just the Facebook community that we have for the DCW. There was a gentleman, in some sense, we forget that the gods or the Elohim or however you want to call them, the other divine beings, they're very insidious in that they are very good at trying to appeal to what we would want, right? Why would we give an allegiance besides the one true God? Is because you have other rivals who are trying to say, I can do better. I can give you something that you truly want. And this person, he claimed that he was a Christian missionary. And yet he actually said, I think the practice of voodoo, I think the use of those practices, it's very good. It's actually good for social justice. It's very good for bringing justice to Haiti. And that we need to partner with like voodoo practitioners to be able to do this for the greater good of the people of Haiti. And I was appalled. I was just the fact that, yes, I'm a Christian missionary and I care a lot about the people of Haiti, but here's this promise that I think if we practice these kind of spiritual practices, we can bring peace and real shalom to the people of Haiti. And there was a little bit of like, wow, the seduction is there. And that's a little bit of how it can get into us because of, I can offer you something better.
Well, I think also the appeal, the fact that like a lot of these Christians, particularly Americans, we think of like whatever, let's say demons, or in this case, like other gods, we think of them as always bringing negative characteristics, like not being able to provide anything good. And so I think it's kind of time that we need to kind of own up to the fact that, hey, these people in these other worlds, they see some kind of benefit from this. Like they are getting some kind of temporal benefit. They're getting some kind of thing. There's a deal that's kind of going on, and there's something that entices them to coming back.
I asked them, how do you know that your gods and spirits that you worship love you? Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, I ask people when I talk to them about their deities and the things they worship, I was like, how do you know that they love you? Can you show me that? Because like I can tell you for hours how I know Jesus loves me. And they don't answer, obviously, because they think it's crazy that I even asked that.
Yeah. In Jeremiah 44, this is 15, then all the men who knew that their wives had burnt incense to other gods, with all the women who stood by, a great multitude, and he's complaining about it. Then they said this, we will certainly do whatever has gone out of our mouth to burn incense to the queen of heaven, probably Asherah, and pour out drink offerings to her, because, verse 17, for then we had plenty of food, were well off, and saw no trouble. And I've often taken that to mean, if I think that other gods don't give other people happiness, even shalom, if you want to call it that, and a meaningful life, then I'm missing the point. I think that's exactly what they do, that they're very good at counterfeiting the kind of happiness that I have found in Jesus. I mean, I was taught growing up that the way to give the gospel is say, I know you're not happy, and I can give you something that'll give you happiness. And the problem that I often had was the person would look at me and say, what do you mean I'm not happy? I'm doing fine, you know. And so here comes Jeremiah along finally, and I read it and I realize that was Jeremiah's problem. That was his challenge. He was saying, guys, you've got to give up worshiping these gods. And the people's response was, why would I? I'm being very well served.
I think that's America's issue. So some of the people, like what you're saying in that verse, was essentially that God was helping not cause trouble, and that is probably one of the gods of America, is not causing trouble, not having trouble, just having a fairly easy, pleasant life.
Or relying on the system that has been built by the divine beings to accomplish those things, to give them peace, to give them that, to deal with all the troubles and things that go on with the world. They put their faith and trust in this system, and then obviously the divine beings that are behind these things, which they are.
Well, what's really kind of seductive is that from Jeremiah's time frame, the people that he was preaching to, they were essentially like, we're Yahweh's, we're going to the temple, we're offering our sacrifices, we're doing the things that we learned about from Moses, so we're technically doing it, so we're worshiping Yahweh. Why can't we have Asherah on the side? Why can't we have Molech on the side? Why can't we have these other gods? Because what's the big deal, right? We're saying that Yahweh is our ultimate big God, but let us have these other little gods that we're seeing on the side, and that explains a lot of times why Ezekiel or Jeremiah or the other prophets would use marriage language, adultery language, saying that the people of Judah, you are committing infidelity to your true husband. And there was this kind of really deep hurt and offense that the prophets would just verbalize back out to the people of like, how dare you?
Yeah.
Of how dare you like damage this covenant that we have, this marriage covenant we have with Yahweh.
To me, that was one of the proofs as I was thinking through over the years. Mike and I were talking about this 20 years ago when he was coming to his understanding and I was too, and we'd often compare notes about how do I know these gods are real, or what's the biblical evidence that Elohim created gods are real. And for me, it was the marriage analogy, that if Susan grabbed the phone from me one day after I was talking in loving terms, love you too, can't wait to see you, and she grabbed the phone from me and it was a dial tone. If it was nobody there, if it was Mickey Mouse, if I was making that up, she wouldn't be mad, she'd be sad. And the fact that God is angry with people for their love of other gods, to me, again, this is a 20-year thought in development, is probably the best proof that they're very, very, very real. God wouldn't be upset with people for making things up in their head, because that's a sign of ignorance or just, stupidity. But to actually have a choice between two very real beings and to choose one over the other, that's adultery. And
what's the first
why
commandment?
God's
That thou shalt have
so
no other gods before me.
I know, yeah, but Rich, that's the problem. In America, we call that, cars and boats and
Exactly.
and money.
Exactly.
We just take that first
Come
commandment
after, right? Like no graven images or things like
it.
that.
Yeah,
Well, again, I think that's a little bit the victim of our own success, right? Because
Yeah.
we're trying to find a way to put into words or into description within the Western Church. We're trying to describe what we're seeing, and so we obviously know a car is not a god, but like the love for it or the obsession of it, the thing that's behind it, it's hard for us to describe because there's no real system now, right? There's no real like the Church of the Cars or the Church of the Ferrari and Lamborghini. Like you don't have that. We don't have actual verbiage to be able to describe what we see, and so we're struggling in that.
And I've come to, at least in my own theology, I'll never call a car or a boat or sex or money a god, because I understand that's the way it's been described, in popular culture. But if I go down that path, I lose the biblical story. I have to choose between being culturally accepted in what I say, that car is your god. If I bring that into the Bible, I lose all sense of the story, because they never would have called a chariot an Elohim, or money. I just don't sense that. So to me, that's where we have to make a choice. Either I'm going to stay biblical in my worldview and use words the way they were meant to be used, which again, let's bring it back as we get close to closing up here. The beauty of what Rich and Mel, what you guys are going to bring to this in the weeks to come, and years to come, is a connection to all the stories around the world of people who have been changed by what Mike brought, and then what the text is continually bringing to them. And I can't wait to hear that. Mike and I are going to throw ourselves into the text and be real nerdy and
Love it.
work through each verse and each concept and try to dig out everything the Bible has to say about the divine counsel and be a clearinghouse of ideas for those issues that, as we were saying in our previous podcast, there's a lot of tangential things and periphery issues that people find interesting, but are not necessary to a divine counsel worldview, right? You don't have to have that view of a specific verse to be considered a divine counsel worldview person or have that worldview. And so what I'm one of the burdens I bring to this podcast is being a clearinghouse for all those issues that have been out there, talked about in Middle Earth, and then get back into the text and say, well, here are the choices I have. Here's where the text goes, right? So we'll do that. We'll enjoy that coming or going forward. But Rich, Mel, we look forward to what you have to bring to us. I'm going to be listening with bated ears, hearing where Mike's ministry has gone. And as you said at the beginning of your prayer,
I tried to press it, then I carried its crown. I reached out to undress it, love let me down. Love let me down. So I tried to erase it, but the ink bled right through. Almost drove myself crazy when these words led to you. And all these useless dreams of living alone, like a dogless bone. So come let me love you. Come let me love you, and then color me in. Well, I tried to control it and cover it up. I reached out to console it, but it was never enough. Never enough. So I tried to forget it. It was all part of the show. Told myself I'd regret it, but what do I know about all these useless dreams of living alone, like a dogless bone? So come let me love you. Come let me love you, and then color me in. So come let me love you. Come let me take this through the end of all these useless dreams of living. All these useless dreams. All these useless dreams of living. All these
Capoeira is a form of martial arts from Brazil, and it's infused with dance.
can't we just like her? Who says we can't? Who says we can't? Who says we shouldn't? Who says we couldn't? Just like we love it. Why can't we just like her? Couldn't we make? Couldn't we make? Couldn't we make? Just like we want it. Just like we need it. Why can't we just like her? Who says we can't? Who says we can't? Who says we shouldn't? Who says we couldn't make it just like we could? Why can't we just like a Well, I don't know if I'm wrong, she's only just gone. Here's to another relationship born by my excellent breed of gamete disease. I'm sure when I'm older I'll know what that means. Well, she cried when she should, she laughed when she could. Here's to the man with his face in the mud in an overcast play, just taken away from the lovers in love at the center of the stage, yeah. Loving is fine, if you've plenty of time, yeah, for walking on stills at the edge of your mind. I said loving is good, if your dick's made of wool and the dick left inside only half understood. What makes her calm? What makes her stay? What makes the animal run away? What makes him stall? What makes him stand? What shakes the earth and out? What makes him mine? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. No, I don't know. Yeah. Anymore. No, no, no. Oh yeah. Hey, 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 hey. You see, I don't know if I'm wrong. It's 'cause she's only just gone. Tell me, why is this day taking so long? I was a lover of time when once she was mine. I was a lover indeed. I was covered in weed. And she cried when she should. She laughed when she could. Closer to God is the one who's in love. I walk away 'cause I can't. Too many options may just kill a man. Loving is fine if it's not in your mind. But I've now too many times I said loving is good if it's not understood. But I'm the professor and I feel that I should know this. What makes her calm? What makes her stay? What makes the animal run away? What makes him tick apart from his wing? And the lonelier side of the jealousy stick. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. No, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Don't know. Don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. No, 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 no. And I don't know. Yeah. Oh, me anymore. I don't know. No. Oh, yeah. Hey, 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 hey. See, I don't know if I'm wrong. It's 'cause she's only just gone. Well, here's to another relationship born by my excellent breed of gamete disease. Finished it off with some French wine and cheese. La vie danse quand elle joue avec moi et je pense que je l'aime des fois. Le silence n'ose pas dire non quand on est ensemble. Mettre les mots sur la fidance quand elle joue avec moi et la pluie me montre quoi. Non, non, c'est la chanson, la nuit, le vent, l'amour, le sang. D'un
No point of reference. You spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born in the vapor of your breath. The planets form. If the stars were made to worship so loud, I can see your heart in everything you've made. And as you speak, 100 billion fairies disagree. Well, you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you so alive, I can see your heart and everything you've done. Every part designed and work of mankind. If you let it just surrender so I can see your heart beat different ways. Every precious one, child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them so alive, like you would again 100 billion times. But one is a good amount to your years now. With the one who never leaves the one behind.
We want it to be trusty and true, but feathers fell from our wings, and we've wanted to be worthy of you, but weather rained on our dream, and we can't take back what is done, what is past. So fellas, lay down your fears, 'cause we can't take back what is done, what is past. So let us start from here. We never wanted to be lusty or lewd, nor tethered to prudish strings. We never wanted to be jealously tuned, nor withered into ugly things. and we can't take back what is done, what is past. So fellas, lay down your spears, 'cause we can't take back what is done, what is past. So let us start from that you are is not all you desire, then come. Come alone, come with fear, come with love, come however you are, just come. Come alone, come with friends, come with foes, come however you are, just come. Come alone, come with me, then let go. Come however you are, just come. Come alone, come so carefully close. Come however you are, just come. Come with sorrows and songs. Come however you are, just come. Come alone, come let yourself be wrong. Come however you are, just let yourself be wrong. Come, it's already begun. Come, let yourself be wrong. Come, it's already begun.
me there, hand like a look in the air. Your bright blue eyes, like a green traffic light up ahead. I'm coming, I swear. Just gotta comb my head, push my way through the crushing